It's no secret I care too much about the quality of my videos. I've put way too much time and effort into everything from my cameras to my production software to building custom solutions so I can get my assets to my editors. Through this, I've learned a ton, spent way too much money, and kept on going too big and then simplifying and then getting too big and then simplifying with my setup over and over again. But I really like where I've landed, and I think there's a lot of parts here that you can take a bunch from. So I want to break down from my camera to my computer to my capture card to my software to my editing, what it looks like to create content for my channel in hopes that you can learn some things and take from it. What I'm not expecting and do not want is for people to just take everything I'm doing verbatim because I'm this magical wizard of AV that you think knows everything perfectly, because I don't. I've made a ton of adjustments to this setup over the last 2 years as I figure out what does and doesn't work, and you're going to do the same, and you should expect that going in. That all said, I'm here to share some of the lessons I have learned over the years so that you can hopefully skip some steps along the way with your own content creator journey. So without further ado, let's take a look at my setup. First, I think it's important to talk about audio, because if your audio isn't good, nothing else matters. You can have the best looking video quality in the world, and no one will watch it if your audio sounds like shit. You can also have terrible looking video, but if your audio is good, you'll get views. I've seen that happen a lot. The go-to that everyone tends to grab nowadays is this guy, the SM7B. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is you probably shouldn't buy this mic unless you know what you're doing, because this mic has some interesting characteristics. Most notably, this mic requires a shitload of power, and you have to use a preamp for it. A good preamp costs $100 to $200 and is a piece you buy separate from your audio interface. The number of people I've seen rocking this mic directly into a Scarlett is absurd and insulting, and don't fall for that. This mic isn't the thing that you buy and then upgrade the rest after. This mic is part of a kit that you buy when you decide you want it. If you aren't ready for that yet, which most people probably aren't, there's a ton of awesome options until you get there. Here's a little lav mic you can buy that has a USB to mic in adapter. Your computer might already have the mic in port too, which is really convenient. And there's a bunch of options for these, and I'm sure you can find reviews and people using them. They're ideally under $20, and the sound quality you'll get from one of these will blow you away. I'm regularly surprised. Here's one that's $33 that has a really good score. I haven't personally heard this one, but basically any lav mic you're going to find on Amazon is going to be fine. Just clipping it onto your shirt and sounding good, that's really hard to beat. When you're ready to upgrade, there are a lot of really cool options. Usually I recommend going straight to the MV7 by Shure. The MV7 is a dope mic because it's not just your typical XLR mic, it's also USB, which means it has both options. So in the future, if you want to control your audio more directly yourself, you can switch to an XLR interface. But until then, you just plug it in over USB and you're good to go. This mic sounds basically as good as the one I'm using now. It doesn't require thousands of dollars of custom gear. Highly, highly recommend. Micro USB is not great. The mic still is though. Placement and how you position that around your face is important. Now that I've shown you the path to the high-end setup, and again, I recommend starting with something cheap and simple. Even your built-in MacBook microphone on the newer MacBook Pros sounds pretty good. Start with that, upgrade as you want to or need to, but don't rush straight to the highest end solution. With that all said, I'm rocking the SM7B, which y'all have all seen here. $400, sounds really good, but it requires something like a cloud lifter, unless you get an interface that's powerful enough for it. And this is why I like the Rodecaster so much. I recommend the Duo, personally, because it's the right balance of control on device and power and also performance. It sounds great. I love this device. Works great for me. So there's 2 XLR ports on the back, bunch of headphone jacks too. It does all the processing on board, and it's powerful enough for this mic so you can plug it in directly. Really, really nice. The main thing I like about this though is that it does all the processing on board, and you're going to have to process the audio some amount. You need to have a noise floor. You need to do some EQing. You need to handle the weird mouth sounds and shit. And a lot of that processing that you have to do, this does on board. It is not just on board like through software on your computer. I can unplug the USB plugged into my computer and this device still works, and I can still record onto it. It even has an SD card slot so you can record straight onto the Rodecaster. Also supports a Bluetooth connection, so you connect your phone via Bluetooth and then use this to take phone calls and do things like that. There's so much versatility. I'm genuinely really hyped on it, and I use it for everything. Whenever I'm not using my Rodecaster, I'm not happy. I have a much longer video about why I like the Rodecaster so much, as well as detailing some of the shortcomings. So check that out if you're curious about more. Regardless, having a high quality audio pipeline that you know and trust is really important, because having audio problems is incredibly stressful. So that's all I have to say about audio right now. We have to go into everything else. The remaining 2 major pieces are my camera and my capture, and then the pipeline for how I orchestrate all of this. The camera, I have some really strong opinions on, and yeah, y'all are going to be upset with me. Opinion number 1, a USB camera will almost never be high enough quality to make content with. I hate that this is the case, that nobody's made a good USB camera. So the Insta360 is okay. The Opal is awful. Because USB cameras are so bad, they love to fill them with weird marketing bullshit like AI And the Lumina AI camera, the Opal AI camera, all of those USB webcams suck. The new Elgato one is okay, and the new Insta360 one is also okay. But for how much you're spending and the quality you're getting, it's just not worth it. And it sucks that that's the case, but I've just never gotten a video quality I would ever use in content off of a USB camera. What I do get surprisingly good video off of, though, is my iPhone. Especially the new 15 Pro. I am annoyed how good the video is off of this phone. They still do their artificial sharpening shit, but if you're just recording, not streaming, you can actually record in ProRes log, which means that Apple doesn't do any of their color processing or sharpening. You then have to process the color yourself, but that's way less work than dealing with a real camera. I promise you. If you are ready to make the upgrade to a real camera, you're going to have to spend some money and even more time. And if you're not prepared to sit there spending hours learning the ins and outs of the settings on your camera and how to manage color balance and like exposure, just use your phone. And the reason you switch from a phone isn't because you just want better video quality. It's because you're ready to take much more control. So I would make the argument, until you're ready to spend $2,000 or more on your camera, you should just spend $1,000 or less on an iPhone. And once you're ready to make the jump, I have some really good recommendations for you, none of which are Sony. Right now, I'm shooting on my Lumix S5 2X. Lumix is the Panasonic camera line, and I've always been a bit of a Panasonic fanboy, but over the last few years, I moved away from Panasonic because their autofocus sucks. And autofocus is really important because if I do something like this, you're going to focus on my phone. Now it needs to focus back on me. I'm filming alone. I don't want to have to deal with these things myself. I have to go and like dial in my focus. And when I was using Panasonic before, the autofocus was shit. Sony's autofocus was and still probably is the best in the industry, but Lumix has caught up with the S5 II, and it's finally in a good place. So what about everything else? The color balance and color grading in your camera is really important, and I've had such bad luck getting color that I liked out of Sony that I've largely given up. They added a profile called S-Cinetone, which is good enough to take the video feed out of my camera and use it for things. But usually I find that I have to shoot log if I want to get usable video out of my Sony cameras. And with the Lumix, their built-in profiles are surprisingly good. In Vlog, their log weird color graded flat profile is actually really fun to work with. And I've had good luck manually color grading, even though I suck at color, just using the log file straight out of my camera. The other important piece on this camera is that it's a USB-C port, not just for charging or controlling on your computer like Sony does. It has a USB-C port, so I can record to an external drive. This video is being recorded to an external SSD plugged in near my desk right now. And when I'm done streaming, I stop recording, I unplug that drive, I plug it into my computer, and I transfer those files really quickly. When I record for hours at a time, and those files can be hundreds of gigs, literally 300 to 400 gigabytes. And this camera lets me transfer those off of a drive really quickly instead of off of an SD card really slowly. I don't believe cameras that only support SD cards actually understand what we need as creators. One last important piece for why I just can't justify going Sony is that if you want a Sony camera that doesn't overheat, you're either buying one with an old APS-C sensor like the FX30, which should not be a $2,500 camera. That should be a $1,500 camera. I know I have one over there. I hate that camera. Or you're stuck getting the FX3 or the A7S III that are minimum $3,000. If you want a Sony camera with a fan in it, which you need for it to not overheat, you're spending $3,000 or more. That's absurd. And to get worse color and video quality than you get off of this $2,000 Panasonic, to me, it makes no sense. And if you're going to be recording for more than 45 minutes, you have to get a camera with a fan in it. And if you're getting a camera with a fan in it, you're only doing that for a reasonable price if you go with Panasonic. So it's hard for me to justify other cameras. It's really hard for me to justify other cameras right now. Even slightly older Sony stuff or slightly older Panasonic stuff, you'll be dealing with the autofocus issues. You'll be dealing with the weird recording standards. You'll be dealing with bad color profiles because they didn't have Cinetone in it yet. Your phone is the way you film without worrying. When you're ready to start worrying, spend the money on a nice camera that has addressed some of these concerns. The middle ground of $400 to $1,500 cameras that are older, newer, whatever, that's a no man's land of pain. And I spent too much time in it to ever recommend it to anybody, especially when the phones have gotten as good as they've gotten. Okay, so what do I actually do with all this video once I have my camera going? For my camera, I have it captured via a capture card. I usually recommend the Elgato Cam Link. There are thankfully lots of other awesome options nowadays too. I have a really expensive Blackmagic PCI card in my computer right now that I'm probably going to sell at some point in the future because it's not much better than the other things I was using. And the way a capture card works is it takes your HDMI feed from your camera or whatever else, and it turns it into a USB camera feed for your computer. Because doing that right isn't as simple as adding a USB port to your camera. Usually it requires some heavy encoding to take the HDMI feed and turn that into something your computer can use. So getting a decent capture card is really important. And right now, I'm all in on AverMedia, not just for the camera side, but more importantly, for the computer side. Usually you can get away with a really cheap capture card, but I want 4K because of who I am as a person. So what I use is the new AverMedia HDMI 2.1 card. I bought the old version of it before, which is a little bit cheaper, because I was waiting for my review unit of this new one to come. I'll probably do a full review in the future, but this card has been fucking awesome. It can take much higher bandwidth than any of the other capture cards I've used, and very importantly, it supports the YUY2 codec for color. I don't want anyone here to have to care about this, but this is the thing I have researched for so long that if I search Mac capture card color flicker on Google, one of my tweets comes up as the third result because I've been trying to solve these problems for so goddamn long. So what is the solution? On my desktop, which is where my OBS is, I've set the color profile from my computer to YUY2 instead of NV12 because NV12 is a color codec that doesn't support all the colors that my Mac wants to put out. So it flickers a little bit when it does that translation from what the Mac sends to what the PC receives. And with YUY2, it's a wider color gamut and you don't have those problems. It literally took me a year and a half to figure this out. So I hope this helps somebody. It's also why I want to make this video into a blog post so this info is Googleable for people in the future. This capture card is the one that I've had the fewest problems with from my computer. Camera, it matters a lot less. You can just get a cam link or any decent capture card. If you just want to capture in 1080p, none of this matters at all. But I care a lot about the high quality feed from both my camera and my computer, making it to my PC. All of that gets handled within OBS, which is the core piece of software that makes all of this possible. Before we get there though, one last thing, especially for us code streamers. This is one of the more controversial things I do that I think helps a ton with the content quality. You'll see if I go to my display settings, I'm actually using 720p. But if you pixel peek and look closely at the quality of content you're getting, that's not 720p. Mac has built-in resolution scaling. So the 720p has every pixel doubled horizontally and vertically so that it can rasterize better. It's a 720p scale. So everything's the size as if it was 720p, but you get 4 times the pixels. So it's kind of a best of both where you have a high-res video, but you also have really big stuff because a lot of people watch this content on their phones. And I want to be sure if you're watching on a phone, the text is big enough, but also that the quality is relatively high. So having the ability to upscale as part of your device, super, super important. And as a result, I find that my videos, especially my code stuff, tends to be really watchable, even on small displays. From there, I throw everything into OBS, where I have a surprisingly minimal setup. I wish it was easier for me to demonstrate that while making content. Probably gonna be an ancient version because I don't use OBS on here. Cool. Now you guys can see the bottom of my camera here too. I'll angle this slightly better. That's not much better. So this is my laptop. I'm gonna mute that just so that it doesn't potentially leak audio around. And here you're going to see the thing I do that's really interesting with my OBS setup. For software devs, especially us web devs, this will look familiar because I'm making these things that look a lot like components. The reason I do that is if I make a change to my camera, I only ever want to have to change it in one place. So these are reference scenes. So this cam scene has just my camera in it. So if I want to make a change, like here, I'm actually zoomed in slightly. I can transform fit to screen. And we see the reason why is the video feed that my camera puts out is at a different aspect ratio than what I have OBS configured to right now. So if I Command Z that, this looks fine. I'll just go with that. Perfect. So now I have this video feed that's exactly how I want. If I want to like mirror it or change color, whatever, I do it here. We have this scene, which is going to infinitely recurse, but it's using the corner cam, which is another nested scene that uses the cam as a layer. And by doing this, I can change things in one place and it affects all of my OBS, which is really nice when you're making changes ever in OBS. And if I want to make my main scene, which is just gonna be my camera, add scene, select the one I want, cam, okay, and now I have this scene set up how I want. This is all part of just open source vanilla OBS, which is the only piece of software I recommend for doing your recording on your computer. Everything else is sketchy and unreliable, be it Streamlabs OBS fork or the other chaos going on with stuff like vMix. I have found a much better experience recording in OBS directly. One other thing you can do if you choose to is to set up OBS with individual source recording. So you can say, hey, OBS, record my screen as a separate file. But I found the source record plugin to be relatively unreliable. And I try to rely on just the output feed from my OBS directly as a recording. And if I want my camera separately, I record that on my camera. And then if we hop into settings here, I don't do anything interesting on my Mac because I don't usually use this, but I do something very useful when I'm streaming. So here is the canvas resolution, and I can set the output resolution to be the same here. And separately, I can set up my stream because Twitch only really works at up to 1080p. So I have OBS set to 4K, I record in 4K, and then I stream out a 1080p feed. Yeah, you can rescale the output. So this is saying, hey, we have to re-encode the video to be 1080p. But by doing that, I can record 4K locally and send out 1080p, which is huge and a really good best of both worlds where I could stream and also record high quality. If you're not streaming, you don't have to worry about any of this, but if you are, it is really useful. Here's where we get into computer hardware though. None of this is easy for me to demo because again, I'm running my PC separately, which might sound suspicious because like I am the Mac guy and I don't trust my Mac for video recording and streaming. It's not because Apple is evil or something. It's because the state of OBS, the piece of software I rely on the most, happens to be the best and most reliable on Windows. When you're using OBS on a PC, I highly recommend using it with a PC that has an Intel processor because AMD has some weird audio issues with processing where it gets a little bit latent and then has weird audio blips and spikes. And an NVIDIA graphics card because the NVIDIA encoder, NVENC, is super, super reliable and really high quality without hurting your performance too badly. Through any modern-ish NVIDIA graphics card and Intel processor, you're going to be good to go. Everything else I found to just be less reliable, but this setup works very, very consistently for me. So then I have everything plugged into my PC. I have my OBS set up on my PC, my Mac and my camera both sending feeds to it via HDMI, and now I'm good to go. Now I'm doing most of what I need to do from there. There's a couple additional pieces I've done to make my experience going from a stream to a YouTube video a lot easier. One of those pieces that I'm really proud of is a tool I built called MarkerThing. MarkerThing lets you use your Twitch stream markers to auto chop parts of your stream. So when I'm about to do a rant, I'll type in chat quickly a marker that says what I'm about to talk about. So like the NPM Cloudflare outage, what even is my job? And I'll put a little marker for the end too. When I'm done, I can download the CSV. I can open a free program called Lossless Cut, which is also open source. I drag the video file in, I drag the CSV in, and it auto chops it into every one of these topics as an individual video. At which point, it's trivial for me to send those to my editors to be turned into real videos. It's hard to put into words how much this has improved our workflow, letting my editors download a single 20 gig file instead of the giant 400 gig file for my whole stream, and also making it easier for us to keep track of what files are where. And this all being free and open source, including MarkerThing. Really good shit. More open source tools make it more likely that the setup will continue to work long term. What else do I need to touch on here? I could talk forever about my post-processing workflow. I'm a huge Final Cut nerd. I will immediately die on the hill that for A-roll talking content where you have one thing that you want to make shorter, Final Cut is the best piece of video editing software ever made, bar none. When you get into color grading or really fancy effects or multi-person workflows, Final Cut's not as strong as other options, especially color grading. That was clearly won by the DaVinci crowd. When it comes to taking a long video, making it shorter, and then adding a few things to it, Final Cut is by far the fastest. The only thing faster than Final Cut is the speed you're going to run from Premiere because it is the most unreliable pile of shit. Don't touch Adobe software if you can avoid it. It hurts. It hurts a lot. What else do I want to touch on here for my setup? Oh, lens. If you're using a full frame, use a 24mm. It's the perfect size for a desk shot. If you're not doing a desk shot, look into other options. I'm using the Condor cables because they're really reliable and I don't want the cable to be the reason my recording fails. I already described the Live Gamer HDMI 2.1. It's the only thing that does YUI 2 color at 4K, so it's the only option I can recommend. I didn't even talk about lights. I hate the Elgato lights. They're super unreliable. They don't connect often enough. If power goes out, they'll just stop working for days. Amaran's killing it. I'm rocking the P60C here. I have a much more expensive Amaran light upstairs. It's Aperture. They are the best lights in the industry. I'll link in the description a bunch of really good options there. They connect via Bluetooth, but you don't have to use that. Already explained the Rodecaster Duo and how I dearly, dearly love it. And my NAS. I'll have a much longer video about my NAS coming in the future. Not just yet. Need to keep using it a bit, but coming soon. I promise. Lights are really important though, and I should have talked about this more. Before you upgrade your camera, before you switch from a phone, get some decent lights and learn how to place them. There's a lot of other tutorials on YouTube for this, but lighting makes the shot. And if I turned off the lights in this room, even if I just turn off half of them, I'll show you. I have my one main light here that lights me. And I have an accent light there, and I have another accent light behind me. If I just turn off the accent lights and only use this one light here, this looks terrible. This looks so bad, even with a $400 light here. But I turn on these shit accent lights and suddenly the shot looks great. So having good lighting is very important and is often missed when people make these types of changes and set up their video setups. The big things are the YUI 2 color, the 24mm lens for full frame because it looks really good, using an iPhone until then otherwise, and then the Intel CPU and NVIDIA GPU combo to have good encoding and no audio issues. So like those are the weird things that I've run into forever that took me years to solve that I've now solved forever. And I hope those little lessons can help you guys out as well. I could do a much longer rant about my video pipeline, but I've already kind of talked about that in my how I make a video everyday video where I show off my setup on Notion and how we do all that. But one last tiny piece of advice, edit your own videos and make your own thumbnails. You will not understand why your channel is working if you don't do those things yourself. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was pulling editors in too early, and it hurt the channel a lot. Once we hit a certain point where videos were consistently doing better than the ones before and the channel was growing and we knew it was working, I pulled in another editor who, I'll be frank, I was slightly better at editing then. Specifically, I was better at editing my content than he was. But he was able to learn what worked for my content really well and get to the point where he was editing my videos better than I would. But that took a lot of time, a lot of back and forth, and a shitload of practice. And if I didn't make a video every day, we might not have ever gotten there. The fact that I make so much content sped up the process in which I could onboard a new editor. And even then, I did it a year and a half too early. And when I revisited having an editor way later in the channel's life, it ended up working much better. And this wasn't because my previous editor was bad. It's because we didn't have enough context on what worked yet. And once we reset and had something working, I brought an editor to help me make it work more efficiently. It did much better. Same deal with thumbnails. Up until a couple weeks ago, I had done every video thumbnail on my main channel myself and all but 2 of them on the second channel myself. Now I have a good friend who's been helping me and a couple other devs in the community. Huge shout out to Cvanilla Dev as well as CJE for helping me out in random windows when I didn't have the opportunity to make the thumbnails myself. And they've made way better thumbnails than I do. I think it's important when you're making a video to think about the packaging before you even start the video. That's the title and the thumbnail and how people will click on it and engage with it. And if you don't start with that, it really sucks to do it later, which is why I see people trying to outsource those parts. Don't outsource the most important pieces of your content workflow. Do all of this yourself for as long as you can. And don't outsource the parts that don't work. Outsource the parts that do so you can fix the parts that don't work. This advice doesn't just apply to content creators. I give this exact same advice to the companies that I am advising and helping with and investing in too, because it's so easy to outsource the things you don't understand when you really should outsource the ones you do, because then you can have more useful oversight and make sure that continues to work while focusing on other things at the same time. I think that's the core of everything I wanted to say about my setup and how I think about my content creation workflows. There's a lot of little gems in here. I know the video is a bit of a mess, but I trust you all to find the value in it, and maybe I'll write a blog post about it in the near future too. Appreciate you all a ton as always. I hope that the chaos I have been through makes your life a little bit easier as you start recording videos yourself. Without further ado, I'm going to sneak off. Again, check out the video in the corner up here if you want to hear more about my way of making content. It's a long video about Notion, but I think it's really insightful. If you've already seen that or you don't care, there's a video below it you might want to see instead. Thank you guys as always. Appreciate you all a ton. Peace, nerds.